Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session about mapping and sequencing high definition props with Barry Wiles from Sequence Solutions. Before we get started, a couple of things. Barry will take time and ask if there's any questions. So please put your questions in chat and use the reply feature to add to previous chats to make it easier to track. Also, your microphones will be muted. So when it's time for questions, we'll ask you to unmute yourself to ask the question. And lastly, please don't forget, visit our vendors and show them your love using the discount codes that will be posted in chat or the link to the codes. Okay, so with that, Barry, all yours.
All right, I appreciate it. Well, thank you for having me. I've been involved with most of the virtual Christmas summits over the years, doing a class here and there. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to be out and sharing, some of our knowledge with the community. I've actually attended some presentations today and learned some interesting stuff. So I think it's been a great event. So as you see, the people that run this, thank them profusely because it takes a lot of effort to put these on and they do a great job. So for those who don't know me, my name is Barry Wiles. I run a sequence site called Sequence Solutions. I put my email at the bottom. If we go through this and you still have questions after this class and you want to reach out to me, we also have a Facebook page. You can reach out to me that way or message me. I'll be more than happy to try to answer any questions or help you when I can. Every presentation I do, I like to start with this. Sequencing especially is an art. It's like a painting. If I give everybody the same color paints and paintbrushes and tell you to paint a picture, we're all going to look at it a little bit differently and pick what we do with the brush strokes and all the things that we do differently. No two sequences are alike. No two sequences are alike. There's no right or wrong. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What I'm going to go over today are some of the techniques that I use and some of the things to look out for with high density props coming more and more formidable in people's displays. So again, there might be other ways to do it. There could be different, better ways. This is strictly, I guess I would say, my opinion on how I would do it or share with you guys. There's not going to be a lot of PowerPoint. There's just a couple of things I want to use it as a lead-in, and we'll jump right into Xlite so that I can start walking through the process and some of the things. So what we're going to do in this class is we're going to talk a little bit about what a high-definition prop is. We're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of these props because I think it's very important to understand what the props and the submodels and all those things look like. We'll talk about making a prop map, how to align submodels, kind of how to look at one high density prop and another high density prop and make things kind of align so when you map things over, it looks better on the prop that you're talking about. We'll talk a little bit about order because order does matter in Xlite, the master file and where things sit, and it works especially with high density props. And anytime I teach, people if you've ever been in my class, we always talk about an aha moment. My goal for this class is that hopefully everybody will have at least one aha moment that says, aha, that's something cool or something I learned or something different. Hopefully you'll have more than one, but that's definitely the case. Just my background, I've been doing this 12 years. I started off with Lightorama, moved to Xlites. I've been doing it for about 7 years now. I started Sequence Solutions right before the pandemic, and I do mostly personal stuff. I'm the head programmer, the only programmer. It's a one-man show, and I do work full-time, so it's a way for me to be creative, and I sit in hotel rooms a lot, so it gives me something to do when I'm traveling for work. So this will be the last slide, but I want to talk a little bit about the process of high density props. So it used to be when we had our displays, the mega trees were always the focal point, and then you may have a matrix, and then we had snowflakes, and we had arches, and we had all these things that went around it. With the advent of Coro and all of these new prop designs coming out and high density props, it's really created an opportunity for shows to be unique and allow you to put a lot of diversity in your show. and do a lot of different things and have props that have a lot of functionality as well. So now one prop can provide such I call it depth, or the ability to show so many different things on it. And it really makes your display stand out and do some cool things. So when a lot of people purchase sequences, I'm gonna mostly talk about mapping today. I will talk a little bit about programming for those of you that want to kind of see some of that. I've got a couple of examples of sequences that I've done that I'll bring over and show through this process. But it's kind of a 4-step approach. First step is you're going to compare your submodel with what you want to map over. You're then going to try to align the submodels and align the things to be as close as possible to each other, so that when you bring the effects over, they give you the most value for how they were programmed by the sequencer. We'll talk a little bit about creating a map. I created a spreadsheet that kind of tells me which one crosses where. And also we'll save a mapping file and show you kind of how that mapping process works. It looks like hold on a second. Am I still sharing?
Yep, we see your X lights.
Okay, the little green bar kind of went away, so I was getting nervous there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about high density props and their layout, because this is a very important subject when you look. I've picked several. When you look at sequence vendors out there, one of our challenges is to create or provide in our sequence layouts enough of these props that you can use and map to your display. The problem we're getting into now is there's so many different high density props and so many different things coming out. It's, I could have 30 of these in my display, and it gets unwieldy when you're trying to create and program something that people can use, and map properly so they can get the value and benefit out of it. And when I look at props, there's kind of 2 different ways that the prop submodels are set up. So on here, I have an Ice Queen, a large spinner, in this case, it's a Grand Illusion, a Rosa Wreath, a PPD wreath, a couple of the showstoppers, and what we call a mega wreath. So there's a couple different ways when people put props together that they put submodels together. So I'll pick the Rosa Wreath for now. In some cases, what they'll do is they will create individual submodels for every single piece of this prop. And if you go through this list, you can see they've got hooks and torches. So what you end up having to do is go in and select these things and create groups in your X-Lights. We'll pick one of the Rosa Wreath. I imported a blank one and it's created 2 groups of everything. But what you end up having to do is go in and create a group for like the mini spokes in the prop. And you can see down here, those are all the spokes that were picked, and I put them in that group. And there's some advantages to that, because it allows you to pick and choose different things if you want, and kind of put groups together that you may do differently than if somebody put all the submodels in one section. It's not my favorite, because what happens is now what you've got this unwieldy number of groups. And when you start doing, if you look at my store display and I've got all these high density props that are set up like this, I mean, the list gets really long. Now I'll show you how I address that when I sequence in a couple minutes. And I apologize, I sound a little muted. I picked up a cold while I was traveling this week, so hopefully my voice is coming through okay. Now, one of the things, I've been very fortunate through the years to work with some great sequencers, Mike over at Showstopper, Clyde at PPD, Steve over at Magic Light Shows. I met him up at the Carolina Mini, and I'm a real fan of a lot of those guys' work. I think they do an exceptional job. So it always allows me to kind of collaborate with people when I can, and see how they do things, and discuss ideas. And especially with Mike, I put a class together with him at the Florida Mini last year, and Clyde and I have worked together, and I've learned a lot from working with other sequencers. So it's a really great opportunity for me. But the one thing I thought really for the showstopper reason, and this is where I'm a little more of a fan of how these are set up. What they did was they created the submodels in what I call submodel groups. So when you look through their layouts, they went through and they created these submodels in lists. So I don't have to go in and try to pick each one of these and create a group. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about order later, but order matters even in the way that the group sections are set up. Because in X-Lights, I don't know if you sat in Mike's class today. Let's go here for a minute. The way X-Lights works is when it looks at groups, it starts basically from the top and works down. So in other words, if you've got a list of effects, let's go to something that's got multiple effects here. Okay. Let's go to looks like the Grand Illusion's got a couple. What X-Lights is going to do is it's going to go in here. It's going to say, okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this color wash on the whole Grand Illusion. Then it's going to go down and it's going to say, okay, on top of that, I'm going to put this flowers group, the bars on the flower group, and then it's going to go down and put the ring. So basically what happens is it started putting everything on the big prop, and then it started piecing the things on the top of it. And that's important because if you put this in the reverse order, these effects aren't going to show up because whatever's on the bottom is going to be the one that shows up most prominent. So in this case, if you look at Grand Illusions right there, you can kind of see this color wash, even though it's on the whole event or the whole prop, the bars effect, which is actually going around here, and then the single line, which is actually working in here, all kind of stack on top of it, okay? If I switch that around, what would happen is this would get placed first, then this would get placed, and then the color wash would be placed on top of it, and you would get this, you wouldn't see the things underneath it. So when I talk about order, it's very important. And your order is dictated by your master view, okay? When you go into your master view, you set the order in X-Lights on how things were addressed in the props and the groups. And a lot of this has to do with the rendering styles you pick as well. So what I do is I put the main prop on the top first, and then I put all the groups underneath it, because what I want to happen is I don't want the main prop to wash out what's underneath it. So this grouping order in your master file doesn't matter in other views. Like if I have a Rosa Grand view, I can move these around anywhere I want. The master view dictates how X-Lights is going to stack your effects on your props and on your groups, okay? And a lot of people don't pay attention to this, and then you get into trouble on it because what'll happen is you'll import a sequence. And I'll show that in a little bit just to kind of show you what it looks like. So with the high definition props coming in, there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. So there's some disadvantages. So let's go back real quick because there's another point I wanted to point out. Now the bad thing about high density props and submodels are, let's go to the Showstopper Spinner, which just came out recently this year, okay? This prop has, what do we got? 83 different submodel groups in it. And then on top of it, he's got a lot of individual things that have been brought out as well. Now, what I've found with the models in X-Lights, when you download a model from the X-Lights depository, half the times the submodels are not correct or are not done properly, especially when you try to sequence and put things in a certain order. So what I recommend to people is if you have a prop and you have a sequence vendor that you're using and you don't have all the submodels in your prop, you can select the prop, you can go into Xlite and you can actually import, and you can say import from submodel from a file. So you can go in and import the submodels from that prop, so you don't have to re-enter them. Now, what I've tried to do, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Grand Illusion, because we're going to talk about mapping a MOA to the Grand Illusion here, is matter of fact, let's go ahead and we'll talk about that now. So the MOA has a bunch of submodels in it, and a MOA is basically a spinner without a middle. So it can be mapped to a Grand Illusion pretty cleanly, with the exception of a couple of things. If I go into a MOA's submodels, there's some things that it has that a Grand Illusion doesn't have. One of it is it's got a matrix top, a matrix bottom, a matrix full, and then it's got diamonds. And if you go into the standard model of a Grand Illusion, the Grand Illusion does not have those models in it. It doesn't have diamonds, and it doesn't have matrices. Now, this one does, and I'll explain why in a minute. But typically what will happen is, in the standard model that has this it's in the standard repertoire, unfortunately. So what I do in my packages is, when I create a submodel and a model for my layout, I put SSL as just sequence solutions, so that people know that those are ones that I created. So what we did was we went into this MOA and we said, okay, look, it has diamonds. So what do those diamonds look like? So I'll go in and I'll pick the diamonds and kind of look and see how they're set up in the prop, okay? So now we're in that process of trying to align our submodels up. So with the Grand Illusion not having them, I went over here and then I created the submodels myself to try to match up with something similar that the MOA had. Now, what I did was I said, okay, you could effectively put 3 layers of diamonds in here because you have a center where this one doesn't. I chose not to because I just wanted to make the mapping look the same so you guys could see what it looks like. So I only put 2 rows of diamonds and I didn't put anything in the middle here. And then I selected all these and I created a diamond group up here. Now, to create groups, and if you're newer to this, a lot of people know how to do this, but sometimes, I'll gloss over it and somebody will say, I don't even know how to make a group yet. What you can do is pick a prop. And if you see this little caret here, if I open it, it tells me what all the submodels are underneath that. So if I wanted to create, in this case, let's just say I wanted all the clockwise hooks, and I'm not going to select them all. I hit the top one, I hit shift, I hit the bottom, I right click, I said I can create a new group from those selected and I can name it. So if you want a quick way of being able to group things in the submodels, that's the best way to do it. The nice thing with some of these other models, you don't have to do it because it's already been grouped together for you. So that's called, when I say aligning a prop, that's what I'm talking about. Now, typically, if you're mapping a sequence, the best thing to do is try to find a high density prop in the sequence that you've purchased or that you've got off the G drive or whatever, and try to find one that has a smaller number of groups in it than what the prop you're mapping to. That way it doesn't get real unwieldy when you pull this together. So once I've got the submodels aligned, and I know I'm moving a little bit fast on that, but it's hard to cram a lot of this in a short period of time. I create a transfer list. Now we'll talk about that in a minute. So what I did was I list all the groups that the MOA has and all the groups that the Grand Illusion has that will match up similar to this. So it already had hooks, so that was pretty easy. Remember, I said it didn't have a matrix bottom. I created a matrix bottom, matrix top, matrix full. Some of these other groups, rings and stuff, it had. And there is a star and a swag group. I didn't use that, but those can be created out of there as well. So then we're going to go in. So let's say we want to start a new sequence. Oops. File, new sequence. We do a musical sequence. We'll go to audio. Oh, you know what? I put the audio up here, didn't I? At the desktop. I'm going to use wish list, so the sequence did earlier in the year. I always run my stuff at 40 frames per second, just because with singing faces and stuff, it gives me more granularity. I'll go ahead and say I'm done with that. So I just created my sequence. I put my music in there, and now I want to try to map the effects from the MOA over to the Grand Illusion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pick the sequence that I want to import from. So in this case, I'll pick the wish list sequence. Now, when you open this, the sequence that you have from the location that you got it, whether you purchased it or downloaded it, will have all the models and everything listed over here. And then the stuff on the left is what you have. So what I recommend for high density props until you get comfortable with all the mapping is to create a map file that works just for your particular prop that you're trying to map over from high density. And then eventually you can culminate it into a full file. So for people who don't know, you can actually save a mapping strategy. I've already created one for time's sake. So I'm going to open up this this MOA to Grand Illusion file. So what I did was remember I created this spreadsheet over here. Oops. Put that back up. I can find it on my display, which display it's on. Remember, I went through and I said, okay, I want for a particular thing on the Grand Illusion, I get this from the MOA. So I went down that list and I moved these over into the MOA. Now, I created a list that moved everything over. When it's red, that just says, hey, the sequence I have doesn't have those groups in it. So that's all that the red's telling me. But you can see it has a swing group, a diamond group. And then when I'm done, I sit there and I say, okay. And now what it's done is it's populated everything over. Now, when I sequence, I break all my high density stuff into its own view. So if you go into your edit display elements, you can see that, remember we talked about the master view. I can go in and add a view, which I'm not going to do right now. But I can say, okay, I created a MOA. I move all my MOA stuff over into that view. And now when I'm sequencing, I can pick that particular view. And I'm not having to sit and scan through it. There are people that scan through the master. It's really a problem to sit and go down this list and try to find it, especially when you start working with high density props and all the subgroups. So what we did here was mapped everything over. So I'm going to open up because I want to make sure I got the right. Discard those changes for now. Now we're gonna, only because with the mapping file and everything, I want to make sure I put both. I did one after the mapping file that actually has the MOA and everything on it. And I'm going to play this. Hopefully, we said the sound we played a minute ago wasn't too loud, so yell at me if it's too loud once I start playing it. Give it a second to, with me video conferencing, my rendering slow down. Plus, I think I got some graphics on this. I didn't look. Were there any questions in the chat?
No, nothing yet.
Okay. So as you can see, just so you can see in the list, here's our MOA and here's our Grand Illusion. And everything on here was basically laid over on this. So you can see they look very similar. They've got similar looks. A little bit farther in because this intro is really long. Here's our diamonds. So our diamonds are lining up. you can kind of see what the look, the looks are very
The
similar.
sound picked up in here, Barry.
It picked up?
Yeah, I got really loud in the music. So.
All right, we'll try that. I just went to very quiet. So the key to this is basically now we have a mapping strategy that maps that MOA over to the Grand Illusion, and it looks pretty clean. So that a little bit easier because they're very similar. But what happens if we have something like the Rosa wreath and a PPD wreath? They kind of look different. They kind of feel different. How do I map that? So let's say I have a sequence with a PBD wreath in it, and I want to map it over to the Grand Illusion or the Rosa wreath. So the first thing we need to do is we need to look at the PPD wreath and say, okay, what does the submodel layout look like? Okay, so the PPD wreath in a similar fashion where you have each ring, each star, all these things are individually laid out as a submodel in the model. So what we have to do is go in and create groups for that particular prop. So what we do is we go through, now I've worked with the PPD wreath a lot. So, I kind of created the same groups that they provide with their sequences so that it makes it a little bit easier to map over, as long as you have the group set up. But I went in and I created those groups for the PPD wreath. So now what we want to do is we want to look, now you can go in and click on the groups and you can see what those, what's all selected in them on the model, right? So we need to do the same thing for the Rosa Grand. So you need to go in and look at the Rosa Grand and say, okay, if I look at a PP, let's look at the first thing on the PPD wreath. Let's look at, okay, so the PPD wreath has what we call a centerpiece. There's this center section. If I go through the Rosa Grand enough, and I kind of know where these things are now, if I click on submodels and keep looking, I come up to this, what they call their spokes mini, and it's kind of the centerpiece of this prop. So I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense to me. So on my list, where I have the centerpiece of the PPD wreath, I'm going to go ahead and map it to the Rosa mini spoke group. And then I'm going to go down to the next one, and I'm going to say, okay, what's the next one? Center rings. You got a couple of center rings. So if I look at they call it the wavy group in the Rosa Grand, I kind of get two rings in there, right? So the key is, and the reason looking at the PPD wreath transferring to the Rosa Grand has a lot more groups. So it's a little less wieldy to try to map, however many groups these are, 10 versus the Rosa Grand has like 25, right? So I do that same process through here and try to create a map. So like the outer diamonds of the PPD wreath is another good one to look at just to kind of give you a feel. And I'm not going to go through all of them. So like the PPD wreath has this thing called petals. And so what I said was, well, let's look at the Rosa wreath and see what's on the outer edge of this. And we pick up the outer, where is it? The outer balls or the outer ring. Oops, I clicked on it. So I've kind of gone through and mapped out. I kind of tried to pick things that kind of look similar and same look and feel. And you may do this and then import it and play it, and some things don't look as clean or nice. The idea is to try to get submodels that are really close, but you may have to either go in and create a submodel if it doesn't match up, or play around with the rendering settings, which is a little more advanced. So then what I'll do is, I'll go back and I'll do that same thing we did before. We're going to import from the sequence. I'm going to load my mapping. I've already created a mapping for the PPD to the Rosa. And, you know, you can kind of go in and see how I map this stuff up. When you create a map, you can save as many of these as you want, and you just make sure you give them different names. You could send one for every single high density element you have on your display, and then just do them individually. You can create one for a whole sequence. Like if you have a sequence vendor and then you've got everything tuned in, you can go in and move all these things over in the file and call it, you know, whatever. In my case, if you're using my sequences, like when I do layouts for people and I import sequences, I'll create a mapping file for their sequence solution file. I've mapped other people's sequences for them because there's challenges with them mapping them, and I try to create that list for them. And you can save it, so you can have as many of those as you want. Now, the only thing I don't like about and it's just the way it's structured, it's not a bad thing. If I want to do a bunch of these, I have to load them each individually and do them and then go back to import. So like if I loaded this one and I said, okay, which I'm not going to do, I'd have to go in and import if I wanted to bring some of these other ones in, you know, bring them over in order to do that. So once we're done, you kind of get this look and feel for when we did the let's go to the Grand Illusion. We started pulling in all those features in the Grand Illusion. I'm sorry, the Rosa Grand is what we want. It's pulled everything over. So now when we watch this, hopefully it won't be as loud. We're looking at these two. This is the original. We should see a similar look and feel on those props. And you can kind of see you're getting the right effects. Is that too loud or is that okay?
It's fine.
Okay. You can kind of see how it's now I created a map for the showstopper. You can kind of see over here. I did that on the side, but now I've got something that kind of looks similar to what it was supposed to look like. So there's cohesiveness to it. There's things that are going on with it that make it look properly. Now I want to show you something. I talked a little bit about the order, so I want you guys to, let's see, is that this? Let's go in our master view here for a minute. See, this one did that. So this particular master view, I had all the props on the bottom and all the groups on the top. So what's happening is not everything's transferring over properly. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the Grand Illusion right above the Grand Illusion stuff. Actually, I'm just gonna move these all to the top right now. Then I can move them back and forth as I need them. All right, so let's go back. I'll probably have to re-render this. I want to find a section where I want to go somewhere where I'm writing a lot of stuff. I think that's a good one. So let's look at the Rosa Grand and try changing the order on them. Probably gonna have to, let's go to, let's take the Rosa, move it to the bottom again. See if I can get this to work. If not, I can create another sequence real quick. I'm gonna have to, I haven't looked in chat. Are we good on questions so far?
There is one question about mapping. So if you import from one prop to another that has more lights, it's more denser on the submodels or less denser. What does X-Lights do?
So it's the way the effects are set up, it shouldn't necessarily matter on the density or how many lights. And some of it's going to have to, is set up on how it's rendered, because if you look at the case of the Mother of All Wreath versus the Grand Illusion, this actually has, it's higher density. There's actually more lines here if you go around and count them versus the lines in here. But as you can see, you know, they still look the same because the way the effect is laid on the prop or it's laid on the submodels, X-Slates automatically takes that into account as long as the effects are set up properly. Now, where you may see something different is if you use like a single strand effect and put it on and it's got more lights in the string, then you may see some differences. And so as a sequencer, that's some of the art that we have to go through. There's sometimes things that I'll put on there that I think would look really cool that might not transition over to another prop. But if the rendering styles are set up properly, you shouldn't see a difference in, let's try something like this. They look exactly the same. Now you can kind of see on this, it's a little denser, so you get a little more color. But even these, see, look how, you know, these are totally different pixel counts and stuff, but this is laid on top of the model. So so they shouldn't come into play hardly at all.
I think you slightly moved that effect, so be careful, might look differently.
Yeah,
and it's true.
That's half the fun.
I know, right? It's true that there is no adjustment to any of the effect properties when you put them from one model to when you import it, right? Regardless of the model, it just keeps all of the settings of the original effect the way they are. So as long as it's proportional to each other, it should look similar.
Correct. And that's again, when you're sequencing, like when I sequence for stuff at home, just trying to play around with something. When I sequence for stuff at home, sometimes I'll go in and sequence kind of at a level that wouldn't transition to somebody's display real easily. But my display is not traditional. I have like palm trees and surfboards and flamingos and stuff. I don't have your traditional. I live in Florida, so it's kind of the theme I've went with. So so here's a case. So remember when I was talking about order? So here's an example. I moved the Rosa wreath down. See how this doesn't look like the prop anymore, right? All I'm really seeing is the middle. And that's because what's happening is it's laying down, it's because in the master file, I moved the Rosa wreath to the bottom. It is now in the master file saying, okay, what's going on up here is going to be the last thing written when I go through the sequence. So what's happening is the sequence is coming up and it's putting this on the display, but then it's putting this on last, which is washing everything out. If I go to the master, well, you don't have to, I don't know why I keep switching. I don't have to do that. Just have it. Let me go back here. I can change the master from here. I just got to select it. If I move that, if I take that Rosa green and put it above all the submodels again, should be able to put it right there. All right, I may have to re-render. I'm going to have, I should be able to just do that section. Let's try it. All right, there we go. Now you can kind of see we're not over, well, we are overwriting still. Why are we doing that? May have to re-render the whole thing. Oh, you know why? Because there's stuff in the Rosa green up top. Let's put it all the way at the top. That was my fault. Now it should work. If you didn't know that, you can actually render just a portion of the sequence if you just want to render a certain area and not re-render the whole sequence. So what I did right there is I just selected the music region I wanted, and then I right-clicked, and I said render selected programs or selected area, and it'll render just that area. Now what we should see, okay, so now what you're seeing is you're seeing that, go back to the Rosa wreath. Now what's happening is what X-Lights is doing is because the Rosa Grand in the master files at the top, it's saying, okay, I'm going to put this color wash in, and then I'm going to put these. I'm going to show you a trick here in a minute with these. You can't really see them yet. I'll drill in higher so you can actually see it. It's doing these first, and then it's putting this this effect over top of it. So now what I'm doing is I'm seeing that effect. Before, all I was seeing was this because it was getting washed out. Okay. Now, this is, I actually learned this from somebody else, but this is kind of a cool trick. I'm not going to go into details on how it works, but you can just look at the settings. So this is an off effect. I once did, I sat with somebody and I said, look, when you go through effects, I could probably spend an hour on just the on effect and tell you how many different things you can do with it. And everybody said, well, what's the off effect? You know, the off effect, all it does is turn stuff off. No, there's actually a lot of stuff you can do with the off effect too. In this case, what I do with it is, I'm going to need two things here. So bear with me just a second. I need that. And I need that. So this is going to be a little bit of an advanced thing for you guys to learn for any of you who might want to look at it. So I put the off effect over top of this. I made it transparent, and I turned on canvas mode. Then what I did up in the color element for brightness is I put a value curve in from 100 to 50. So now what happens is every time that off effect is hit, it starts at 100% brightness and goes down to 50, and anything underneath it follows that same pattern. So when you see this going to the beats where it's going high to low in the color, so if we play that, see how it's going with the beat? I turn that off effect. Each one of those off effects goes from 100% brightness to 50. I can make that 300%. You kind of get this washed out look. And I've used that technique. I actually have one coming out on a sequence this month that uses that. And it gives you the ability to play with the brightness. And what's nice with this is you can do it on the whole prop, and it versus trying to do it in each one of the effects. So that way you don't have to try to get a timing. So like if you look at a matrix or a tree that I do, I spend a lot of time on those, and I'll have 20, 30 layers to really give you an, bring a lot of different things out in those props. Excuse me. So if I put that at the top of all those layers in the matrix, it'll take everything in the matrix and turn it on. So just a little tip there. It should be an aha moment for just about everybody, because I actually got that from my buddy Clyde a couple of years ago when we were working on a sequence together. So like I said, so order matters. Just to kind of give you a different look and feel, I do have, you guys will get a little bit of a sneak peek. This one's one that's coming out probably in a week or so. But just to give you an idea of, this one has some graphics in it. So I put some graphics on a discard chain. Where are we at on time? Okay, we're coming in pretty good. I'm going to have to render this again just to make sure it works right. So are there any other questions in the chat?
There was a question if the master view change becomes the master for all others, and it will become the master for anything new you create, but not for existing ones. For existing ones, if you want to change, you have to make it master and be rendered.
Correct. Now, what I do on my display is I actually have what's called a master 2 that I know is in the right order. So when I create a sequence, and I'll show you that in a minute, how to do that, I select that as the master for when I create the sequence, and it automatically makes sure that the master file for that sequence is in the proper order, because it will. And X-Lights will get a little bit, like if you open up a sequence that somebody else did, it may mess up your master file. And I don't know what the rhyme or reason behind it is. I never talked to Keith, on what drives that. But yes, for sure, your master file will travel with your sequence for sure. So this one's Lion King. So it'll just kind of give you a look of what some of these high density props can look like, different color schemes, but it really gives you, it allows your display to really have some pop. You know, I've seen, you know, people will run effects on the whole prop, that's okay, but these submodels and the way you set them up really gives you some interesting looks. So like here's one where I'm running a, whoops, let's do this, let's go a little farther. Here's, you can see the picture effect. I'm actually going to run some images, you know, in a circular pattern. But guess what? Guess what I didn't do? I left the master file in the old format, I believe, didn't I? Yeah, see the Rosagram's on the bottom. That looked like that was the culprit one. Do it again. And then the PPD rate's bad too. Remember, I left those down because I was going to show it on this particular one. I was going to show you the order thing, not in the other one. So I left this just to move everything up out of the way, just in case. PPD rate should have been okay. And some of these, this is a sequence I'm still working on, so it's not all completely done. I'm going to go ahead and re-render. Well, let's see what happens. So little hair. Yeah, it's going to need to render. But a couple of things just for high definition props, just to kind of give you a little bit of when I do a sequence, you're going to find a lot. I do a lot of buffer manipulation. So in this case, you can see I got the bars effect in 3 different levels going in 3 different directions, right? So I laid that down. So that's one way. I'm not using a lot of submodels on that one, but I'm using the buffer to get the look on the prop that I'm looking for. So you can really do a lot of things, because I've done things where I've got submodels in use, and then I'm also doing things on the top level models with the buffers where I clean out the middle, so that you can you can get a little bit richer experience on the props and what they look like. Because when your audience is sitting and watching your light show, you know, you want each sequence and each thing to look a little different, and it keeps them there longer, right? I mean, I hate to say it, I see a lot of the whole house display in the bars on the mega tree sequencing, and that's great. It looks good, but when you run every sequence like that, it really, it doesn't show your house off the best it can. And I've been in places where guys will have 60 sequences running, and they're all different and in different colors and different. And that's really important as you guys are putting these things together. If you're sequencing your own, that's where these submodels and these high density props can really help you get a great experience on your display. You know, here's one where I'm running, you know, I don't like a lot of empty space when I program these. So a lot of times I drop the color wash in as kind of a background, because I don't like to have everything like in pure black, right? Just lay down in a sequence where I don't have a lot of these props done. But so you can kind of see, like here, I'm using a single line effect that's probably on a buffer. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. Where's my layer settings? So see, I've got a buffer going there. So that's the single line. That buffer is making that go in there. The color wash has a buffer where it's only being put on the, you know, top 2/3. So that's a way to sequence at the prop level and still get some depth versus using submodels. The PPD wreath, if you look at that, I'm using a lot of submodels on that one. So, you know, I'm going down, you can see all the various submodel layers because I'm using the different like I'm using the middle rings and swirls and things like that to try to get a little more depth into the prop. So it offers you a lot of different things. One other thing I'll note too, that just in your submodels, and I think this is a kind of a cool thing too. So a lot of people now are running holiday and Christmas shows. The nice thing about a lot of these props, if you look at them, they're kind of not, other than if you're using snowflakes and stuff, but if you look at most of these, they can cross any holiday, any look, in any way you want to do it. And the one thing that I really liked what they did with with some of these props is they'll embed, like he has somewhere in here, I think he's got, let me see if I can find them real quick. He has Halloween stuff. So he put a spider web in there. He's got a bat. He's got an eye pupil, a dragon pupil. So there are some things in here with submodels, and you can go in and draw these yourself, right? You can go in and say, okay, I can click on and open up the box. That was kind of weird, right? All right, where did my box go? I might have just done the X-Lights boo-boo. I did.
You have your submodel window open. Can you?
I know I can't close it because I went to move the selection tool up, and now it's got me locked out. So what we're gonna have to do is drop X-Lights out. I was hoping to get through the whole presentation without X-Lights doing something wonky, but I know we're coming up on time anyway, so that's So were there any other questions on that? Well,
I had a question, but you don't have to go. I'll figure out it. When you showed that submodel for the Grand Illusion, and you split it into 3, top, middle, and bottom, but the effects were going like 3 concentric circles around.
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure out how did you go from like a vertical buffer where it would be split middle to actually be ins and outs.
Yeah, so it's whoops, what did I do? Open up 2 of them. So here, let me change. Let me show you real quick. So
don't let that stop you. And if you want to continue,
I've pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. But let's go back to the Carolina Mini layout I was using. Yeah. So the way X-Lights looks at this Grand Illusion is if you look at the node layout. So anytime you want to know how X-Lights views your prop, do a node layout. So X-Lights just looks at that as a big square like this, okay? So when I ran that sequence where it was going around, that was Lion King, that's one, right? It was right there, right? So what's happening is it's putting the bars effect. If we look at the buffer, right here, what it's doing is it's saying, okay, I'm running the bar effect effectively across this square from left to right, okay? But how X-Lights has how it's mapped in the model from that square to this is it actually makes this circle is actually a square. So in other words, go back here again, node layout. If you were to look at how X-Light looks at everything in an XY coordinate. So what it's doing is it's taking this prop and basically cutting it in half and kind of folding it over so it's square. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's a hard concept to do from a circle to
right. And your render style for that is default, right?
Yeah, so I've got a default.
That's for preview. Then you would have split it into top, middle, bottom. Got
it. Because if you would have done per preview, then what it's going to happen is it'll actually go across. It'll go see kind of how it's kind of going across.
That's what I was thinking. The top, right? It's like why is it the top? Yep. Gotcha. Use the okay.
Yeah, but the default says how it's the So per preview it, and for those of you who may or may not know this, and you know this part, but per preview means it's how it looks on the screen. Per default is how Xlight looks at it. So, and that's as you get into these props, like if you look at the Ice Queen, oops, stop. If we look at the Ice Queen node layout real quick. It's actually a custom. It looks like the Snow Queen, right? So this is how Xlight looks at it. So even if I did that third across, it would still go across the top, even if I did it by default, because this is the default. It looks at it. It's created a square. So the bar effect would go down about a third and run across the screen like this. It would run across the pop the same way in the default mode as per preview. So in these custom models, a lot of times the default and per preview will give you the same thing. Any other quick questions? I know the next presenter comes in at 7, so I want to give them a couple minutes to set up.
Can you show us that master view that we were talking about?
What was that?
Even that master view.
Uh-huh.
You were talking about that master view too.
Oh, yeah. So here, let's do this real quick. Let's restore to permanent, discard the changes, only because I know on my layout what it looks like. So this is the layout I use for my store sequences. So what I'll do is I'll go in and create a new sequence. Music. Yeah, let's go back up here. I'll just pick the one wish list for the heck of it. But when it comes in here, it says select the view that you want to use. I go down the list and there should be a master 2. So you can select what you basically want your master file to be when you create the sequence. So when I click the master 2 and then I say done, that allows my master setup in my sequencer now to be the way I want it. If I can get the display, the display elements thing is not coming up. Something else, if you start losing your windows, if you say dock all, it'll dock all your open windows to the screen so you can find them again. So there it is. That's what I was looking for. So what I have in my programming list is I have a master 2 that I have things laid out because I make sure my matrices, my P5s, my high density props are above their groups and everything. So that's all set up properly. So when I create a sequence and I use the master 2, it will create the master file will look exactly the same. It'll be laid out the way that I have mine. So because there's a couple things that are important, like I have this whole display end. If that's not like your last group in the file, some of the sequences won't look right because I use that to fade the whole display on there. So yeah. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate it. If there's other questions, message me, email me, whatever. Because like I said, there's another presenter coming at 7, and I want to give them a couple minutes to be able to get online and do what they need to do. Reach out if you got questions. I'd be more than happy to answer them. And appreciate your time, and I appreciate the committee having me on and doing this.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Barry. And everybody, please don't forget, show your support to our sponsors like Barry's and go visit their websites and make use of those discount codes. Everyone, have a great night.
There's a 30% code out there for the weekend on sequences. So go out there and grab some. And like I said, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.